Yeah, it's everybody can hear.
Okay, sorry if I missed it. I was just gonna ask, where do you find investors?
The classic question: where do you find investors? And the easy answer is your community is your network, and that is your greatest strength as a founder. If you're out there at events like this, you're already taking the right steps towards being able to find investors. If you make friends, you build a small group where you're holding each other accountable, you're meeting kind of like a circle of operators. If one of them lands a big check, who do you think they're going to tell first? Their friends, saying, hey, these guys are actively deploying. Not only that, but they said, do you have any other friends with good companies, especially if it's non-competitive? And then, you're the first name out of their mouth. Another place to find investors, a lot of high net worth people in LA. A lot of them love those little private clubs like Soho House and whatnot. The example I gave earlier is Green Label was a 12 million, or sorry, Green, come on, Jake. The big green, big co-working space downtown, they were raising $12 million to build this thing. 8 floors of cannabis offices. They'll do events all the time. Where did they raise the money? Soho House. Why? Because they were just loudly talking about it at a table, and some investor sitting next to them goes, well, if you find the building, I'll buy it for you guys. Like, that's how that played out. $12 million. This is the only city outside of maybe New York that shit like that actually happens. Maybe Miami, whatever. But at the end of the day, you don't know where your investors are going to come from. There are a lot of pitch events. There's Pitch Force and ArcView and all these things. Some of those can be worth doing, but the key to success is talk to people who've gone through them, ask how the experience was, ask if it led to anything, and then you can hack your way into non-cannabis investor events all the time. Non-cannabis, tech investors, life sciences investors. Cannabis is so broad, depending on what you're doing, but for the most part, it will apply that you can showcase at these events and be the one person in the room doing something different. If everybody's doing an AI SaaS tool, but you're doing a dispensary, there's investors that are going to say, okay, that's the one guy I want to talk to, or girl. So online is a great source. Look at press releases. Daitruong, Daitruong, runs Highly Objective. It's a newsletter that goes out every week that recaps all of the big deal activity within cannabis. You can also find a lot of that on New Cannabis Ventures. When you go to this, you see who the firms are that are writing checks. And then as I mentioned earlier, the best rule of thumb for landing a check from one of those people is to get a warm intro via somebody who works there or somebody they've invested in. That is the first test they put you through for landing a check at many of these places. I'd say beyond that, it all depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for big VC money, yes, those routes are tried and true, but friends and family money comes from you talking about this shit around your friends and family. Make them aware, build a deck. There's lots of pitch practice groups that sometimes are just for feedback, but have professional investors that are part of the judging panel. Well, those investors are doing it entirely because they're looking for unique deal flow before anyone else has seen it. If somebody's judging something in the space, like a startup competition, it's because they're interested in early stage and they think there's money in it for themselves. So I love a lot of the pre-seed stuff. There's a lot of co-working spaces, like in Chicago, there's 1871 that has a cannabis-focused track. Every 6 months, they're doing something cannabis-focused. Ease Momentum, as I mentioned earlier, does the $50,000 grants. I think that's decent. Outside of that, you can cold email these investors, but I would much rather you cold email someone that that's connected with them and get that warm intro in. I'd say outside of that, grant money, don't forget about that, because there are a lot of NIH grants, health grants, even protecting certain watersheds when you're building out your cultivation site, and can land you with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Definitely a lot of social equity ones, not many, not as much as there should be. It's been pretty shitty watching a lot of these $100 million funds and stuff pop up but never end up deploying anything. But look, I think behind the scenes, even when I was at Benzinga the last couple of days, it sounds like there has been some movement. Seth Yakatan, he's a broker here in LA. He's raising a $100 million fund now. What does he look for? Interesting early stage local stuff. So Though that's the key. I know that's a really long answer, but the one takeaway is it's all about your network. It's all about your community. And if you see things like this, events like this, I mean, that's where you want to be, because you can always find out about other bigger investor events and stuff like that. Anybody? Okay.
Hey, I'm Sezame. What advice do you have for building projections for like a company that has not made any money? Because there's a lot of investors that want to know how much you're going to make, and you might not really know until you get over.
It's a really good question. How do you know what your financial projection should look like? A lot of the CFOs and fractional CFOs in cannabis obviously have a bunch of other clients. A lot of times they already have those benchmarks in front of them, where it's like, oh, I work with this dispensary. This is how much they did their first year. You're in a similar town with a similar audience, similar total adjustable audience. It's reasonable to assume you're going to do $2 million your first year as well. So the CFOs are sometimes the keeper of the keys, but investors, brokers, anybody that's seeing these pitch decks is a great resource, especially if you make friends with some of these guys and it's like, hey, like, by chance, do you have Cookies deck? We'd like to see what kind of numbers they used. So you can just do that one-to-one. I'd say watch pitch events. There's some that are live streamed, like Weed Street or Weed Club. I remember used to do them during the pandemic. So you could watch other founders pitch their deck, get to their market slide, and say exactly what their projections are, straight from the horse's mouth. I'd say beyond that, I wouldn't worry too much about valuation. Projections does matter, but like even in tech, even at a top startup accelerator like Y Combinator, the way valuations were determined was the guy who ran it, Dave McClure, was walking company to company going 3 million, 2 million, 1 million, based on what he understood about their company, because it is such a hilarious guessing game, and essentially investors don't put a lot of stock into that at a pre-revenue stage. Early on, they know it's a shot into the dark. It's all about how you reach that number, way more than it is what the number actually is. And don't forget about social media. As I mentioned, there's a lot of groups on there, that are more than willing, like different associations. If I was launching a hemp beverage product, I'd go to the Hemp Beverage Alliance, get onto their Slack, and just pose the question into the ether of, hey guys, what are you saying with regards to first year projections for a lemonade brand launching in Georgia? And you're gonna get 5 answers back from random people, because this is still a tight-knit community that helps each other when these type of things pop up. The investors can sometimes give it to you. If you have an investor, especially one that you've more befriended, maybe they're not a good fit for your deal. Oh man, a lot of times those can be incredibly valued to really lean on and say, hey, can you validate this for me? We're thinking about saying we'll do about $1 million. I don't know what you've seen, if you've had friends who've seen similar decks, but does this align with what you're seeing? So yeah, you can go to them, and it's not gonna spoil the opportunity for them to write a check. It shows them that you are somebody who's thorough and goes out there and validates this stuff with the right people. Next. And there's crowdfunding and there's debt. The debt stuff's really easy. You can go to Fund Canna and get approved for lines of credit in 48 hours if you already have existing sales.
What's up, Jake? My question is there a noticeable difference between cannabis investors and just general investors? And the difference between the people who know the cannabis market, would you pitch them any different than you would a normal investor?
I love that this question was asked. Is there differences between cannabis investors and other types of investors, tech, and how you approach them? And their different levels of knowledge. How does that factor in what you're putting in front of them? At the early stage, at the seed stage, the pre-seed stage, you've either made a little bit of revenue or zero revenue yet. Generally, the pitch is going to be the same. It's all about education. It's all about you as a founder being a good steward of capital. It's all about that go-to-market and showing them the dollar signs. So they're always going to look for the same fundamentals. They want to see those big glamour metrics. They want to see that you have a thought-out use of funds. and obviously things like a term sheet that they can execute on. So yeah, I think it's absolutely critical to treat them the same, and more importantly, ask them questions about what they know and don't know. Because if you have the opportunity to position yourself as the one who has the knowledge, as the market expert, as a thought leader in a one-on-one conversation, because they say, well, I understand a little bit about, what cultivation looks like in California. Can you share more? And then you talk to the guy for 5 minutes and you hammer them on, here's some of the big players, here's the average price of a pound. You're able to flex all of that knowledge. That person goes, I don't even remember the fucking question I asked, but I know that guy is someone I want to keep talking to based on that answer. So I think it's really key to, like I said, to bone up, especially if you're in something that's hyper technical, like tissue culture, for instance. You need to know who the other competitors are in that space and not leave any of them out, or that can be a huge red flag. But generally, like I said, at the early stage, a one-size deck will fit for all. If you have something hyper technical, create a version for public consumption that you're fine getting out, and then create a version that's protected, that you're only sending to certain investors because you're worried about the idea getting out. Like if that makes you feel better to have separate versions, I think that's a perfectly valid use case. But for most people, one of them is going to be fine when it comes to their level of cannabis knowledge. The only times that would really matter, I think, are probably some of the really top tier firms. They are going to rip apart every single slide, but most of them aren't investing in pre-seed or seed stage companies anyways. So it's not a huge pressing problem until you get farther along, because the expectations of what an investor needs from you get progressively more rigorous as you get further along in this process. When more money's at play, they need you to show even more that you're a good steward of capital. And at those later rounds, you can speak to how you already used the existing capital, how good you are with it, how you got that full 18 months before you came back and started to raise again. So I would say keep them the same. Don't pull people off of the deck. Don't route them to a video that lives online. You want to keep them always living in your document. I'll think a little bit more on that. It's a great question. I don't think my answer is really going to change. I think one size does work. But in general, I guess, the big takeaway is just asking those questions. Hey, I'm going to run through this deck today. I know I've seen that you've invested in cultivation before. Is it fair to assume that I don't need to go into the nuances of greenhouse versus indoor versus outdoor versus, just asking that up front? That's what they want. They want a conversation with you. They don't want to be pushed against a wall and pitched for 5 minutes. They don't want to be talked at. They want to be talked to if you're in a one-on-one meeting. The back and forth is how they assess this is a good fit both ways. You need to go into these investor meetings, even if it's a friends and family, with that in mind as well. Is this going to be someone that is going to add value, that's not going to be disruptive, that's not going to cause you pulling your hair out, when you talk to them every 2 months. So.
What is the importance of things like you said you were at Benzinga, MJ Impact, BizCon? I personally I just literally got in at 4 o'clock this morning. So, and the thing is, I didn't even see you there. So, but as for putting on the deck, different things, you said logos and partnerships matter. When putting a page saying, hey, been at Benzinga, MJ Impact for the last 3 years, been here, different things like that in the industry, does that matter on your deck or does it not?
So when it comes to participation in those events, like I've been at, Benzinga the last 3 years, no. If I showcased at ArcView 2 years ago and I won their pitch competition, yes. So if it's something that shows real validation, 100%. If it's you just being in the right rooms, no, it's not going to move the needle in any way. I'm really big on, like I said, associations. You're a part of NCIA, great. You're a part of whatever your local program. In Arizona, it's MITNA. Everyone in Arizona seems to know MITNA as the place that they gather. It's kind of a connective tissue and becomes you have to have this before we want to deal with you, because otherwise you're not really in the community. I mean, that's what I hear from local operators in, LA. It's different. If I'm a flower brand, I want to be putting Sun and Earth certified on there if that's what I'm doing, or similar. Your logos will always matter. If it's attending an event? No, like I said, but always err on the side of if you can use a logo to depict something, use the logo as opposed to writing it out. It always goes back to that 7-second rule where most of these investors are just skimming each one of these slides. So you gotta hook them, and logos are an easy way to do it. Anybody else? Yep.
How are you? So, I'm trying to get investment for a cannabis storefront, and if I have to have 51%, and then I'm trying to break up my percentages, what's like acceptable? Like for instance, I have somebody that's willing to give 250 grand, which is not nearly what I'm looking for. However, it's substantial, and if I can squeeze that in, I would like to. But yet, I'm also trying to pitch to these bigger firms, and they may not even want that to be involved. So whether it is or isn't, maybe you could give me two different, possibilities of what percentage I should be considering giving away, and then should I be trying to claw back some of that, like in the agreement, like meaning like some people possibly they just want to help me operate the shop, or
So this is the question obviously is really around knowing how much equity to assign. Certain basically. I think the best way to really think about this is why the safe note and the convertible note structure exist. So we don't have to be getting into assigning equity percentages at this stage. What they are investing in will convert into equity when you hit that next tranche. This is designed to protect you as much as it is to make this as user-friendly as possible for them, and not end up in A, legal headaches, but also B, tax obligations on direct equity ownership in the company. Now, how much should you hold back? I mean, at very least 10%, for ESOP. When it comes to future employees, I usually divide up equally amongst co-founders. I think when co-founders are on at different percentages, it can really cause trouble down the road. So yeah, anybody that's part of the core team, I'd put on, maybe 10% apiece. I think at the end of the day, as you get further in the process, if you as a founding team still hold on to 30-40% of your company as you're getting into the later, A and B rounds, you did really damn well. I think there's a lot of founders that I know who are pretty successful who have about 10 to 20% is all they have left, and they're still very pleased with that. So it all is, the problem with this is it's just such an answer that varies based on so many different variables. Like for instance, if I was a company that had been trying to hit the fundraising trail for the last 2 years, and I wasn't getting any checks, and then out of nowhere some investor comes in and says, yeah, I'll give you 250, but I'm gonna take double what you think is acceptable. Look, if that's your last gasp, that might end up being a deal worth taking. If that person adds a bunch of extra value that's going to help guarantee the success of the company, that extra percentage might be worth giving up. It's always going to be so case dependent, but this is where advisors come in. This is where having options comes in. If you have just one term sheet, it's a horrifying position to be in. You need to have others to compare against it and take that back to other investors as ammunition, saying, you guys want 15%? These guys are saying they'll offer the same check size for 10. Why would I ever consider this? How do you go above and beyond? Then they're pitching you. Then the script flips a little bit, and needless to say, that bodes well for your ability to land their investment. So yeah, advisors can be really critical on that, but in general, look, it's not a one size fits all. Obviously, we have public companies now and shares changing hand on the secondary markets. Like that stuff just adds other layers of complexity here. But look, at the end of the day, owning 10% of something that's $1 billion versus owning 50% of something that's $1 million, it speaks for itself. So it should really be on how much money do I need to execute? What's the best possible percentage I can get based on what my others' offers are? Or do I have other data points around what a reasonable offer is that I can get from, a friend's company, an investor, an advisor? Anybody else? All right, a little break before the panel. But without further ado, I am delighted to introduce our panel for the day, which actually includes some real-world LA operators. Gentlemen, I'd love to have you each give a short introduction, maybe a minute or two on yourself. David, you want to start, and then Amir second? Yep.
Sure. Thank you. My name is David Powells. Wow. My cannabis journey began years ago when I just decided to grow some cannabis for some patients back in 2001. And soccer moms, PTA moms, people who just regular family that needed medicine. And I started bonding with the plant then. Then in about 2010, I opened up Alternameds, which is my Prop 215 days. Got the ability to meet a lot of beautiful people. I was growing the cannabis in the back of my shop. At the time, there was people getting raided left and right. We got hit, but I stayed in business. Anyway, long story short, that drove me to come up with a couple patents. I actually have some patents now. There's a lot of struggle we're going to go through, but you got to think through it, and you got to make new stuff. You can't follow the other guys off the edge. So I have a few patents I can discuss later, but now I'm very blessed to have my Type 6 manufacturing, delivery, distribution, and I'm partners with the farm in Humboldt. It's taken everything out of me to get there. I started looking for an investment 10 years ago. I still haven't got an investment, but I'm here now. When I was asking for investment 10 years ago, I had no licenses, no patents, and here I am. That's my story.
Good afternoon. My name is Amir Gresham. I am a licensed retailer in the city of LA, born and raised in LA. I'm a former cultivator and manufacturer. I got introduced to cannabis long ago, decades ago now. I was in high school, actually. I became a distributor, and the legacy market is what they call it. I've been in this process for about 6 years since the Prop 64 got passed. And I entered in the retail process, but I was also, like I said, I was a former cultivator and manufacturer out of the San Fernando Valley. We did that for a few years during COVID. Had some challenges, but really learned a lot. This experience has taught me a lot. They say in cannabis it's dog years, so I feel like, I'm 2 decades in at this point. I'm also a board member of the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association, where we advocate for cannabis entrepreneurs and progressive policies. So everything that you may learn from me, I see people who may be new to cannabis right now. So this is the ground level for a lot of things that are going on. So I hope I can create some value and provide some insight for anybody here.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, that does actually bring up my first question, and I want to hit on this one just because Amir, you just mentioned a lot of these key associations, affiliations you have, and how those have helped. But what were the keys to locking some of these partnerships? Origins Council, ETN. How did these come to fruition?
Really shared experience, like shared lived experience. I mean, let's be honest, like cannabis was associated with Black and brown people, for a really long time. So just like we were having LAPD, raid trap shops in my community, the farmers up north were having the same thing with their farms, so a lot of it was shared experience around trauma, really. Bonding around trauma is how it started. People sharing their story, how long they've been in the industry, sharing our why, really. There's a lot of people who come into cannabis and their why isn't aligned with the industry, and those are the people you see losing their shirt or losing all of the money that they put up. So really forging these relationships had a lot to do with not only lived experience, but it's like you can relate to my struggle. You feel what I'm going through, and we do it for similar reasons. And I feel like that's what's been fueling the cannabis industry, through these peaks and valleys that we've been going through.
That's a great answer. And David, I want to actually quickly turn it over to you as well. I mean, you've been active since 2001. I mean, coming out early with retail until Prop D was derailed. You got delivery licenses, distro licenses, obviously manufacturing now. Why brand? Why now? Why the change?
Okay, so actually my brand came on accident. My father got sick, and that took my mind off of everything else. All the struggles that we have in cannabis, getting the licenses. I almost didn't get my license down here because I had to take care of my dad. And I already knew I had a brand. I had been doing this a while. It's for the people. This is why I do it. I don't drive fancy cars. I got a lot of licenses. I got some stuff, but I just keep on focus, right? So I was trying to find a way to get the cannabinoids to get all the way to the bone, and I discovered activated oxygen. So I have a new formula with skin, right? So I didn't just come out and say, this is what I'm going to do. I kind of just let the path open up for me, and then realized later, wow, the wellness is the right section to get into. There's a lot of mistakes being made here. So you have to observe what's going on before you take place where you're going to be, what your brand's going to be. I didn't know I was going to be a topical. Didn't know I was going to be a wellness. Thought I was going to be a doobie company or make rosin. And I saw this need. Why are you selling CBDs for over $100? That can get that in GNC. I started seeing these little mistakes that they were making in the wellness. And so that's when I chose, this is my route. I help my family around me. I'm going to start working on this patent. Yes, I'm asking people for money, but I'm still on my path. I'm still maintaining what I know works. So now when the investors come around, they can see, oh man, he's not wasting his time. He's still working. We talked to him a year ago. Now look where he's at. So it becomes a bigger, so put more of your time into your stuff. Let them see that you know where you're going. Let them trust you. And then, but they have to have that same respect for the work. And that's how I kind of look for my investors.
Yeah, and you absolutely nailed the timing, because these days longevity and wellness focused investors are everywhere. Yeah, a lot of people, high net worths who've made a bunch of money, don't care about anything anymore except for making their life longer. Got Peter Thiel drinking kids' blood. I mean, just kidding. But this is an era in which I think it's absolutely critical, to go out there and court these investors, and more importantly, educate them on why cannabis is part of wellness. Well, excellent. And one thing I wanted to clarify is, do you co-manufacture for other brands or just your own stuff?
So currently I manufacture for Powell's, and we manufacture gummies from a brand called Dulce Gummies, and I allow them to manufacture with a managing partner with me. But I am going to come out with other brands. I have live rosin that we make, excellent live rosin, artisan. We don't use a big machine. We actually take our time. But my goal is to get myself into, I'm at 26 stores in about 8 months, which is really good for being in the wellness. The wellness is very small, but at the same time, there's less people to compete with. So yeah, it's just one day at a time, and don't lose focus of what you're doing. Don't let the investors kind of slide you off. Stay with what you're doing, because they'll pull you back, and they're trying to depict you and pull you apart because I have patents, I have licensing, I can't get an investor. And so I'm trying to. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But I still move forward, and I get out there and I do the PADs, and I meet the customers and I meet the bud tenders. The first thing is getting it into the store, but then keeping that. So now I have investors circling around and seeing what I'm doing. But you always maintain your face in what you're doing, because you have value. You're the person behind it, and that's who they're betting on. So if you want to make them know that they're betting on the right horse.
Yeah, and any tangible assets you have, it might be your facility, it might be your team, and it certainly is an IP strategy goes a long way. I think there's a lot of investors that were burned in the first go around with the green market, and the biggest thing they didn't have at the time was any IP, any patents, any of this stuff, because it just wasn't happening. Now we have something where there can be a real value assigned to it. That's a one-to-one with what we've seen work in other industries, be it wellness or CPG of any sort, vegetables, whatever.
So the best thing I can do is not get sidetracking and let that. I've seen 120 investors, and I'm going to see 10 more in the next couple months. They're already lined up. But I have to show the same face to everyone. I can't let that frustration get to me, because I got to give everyone the same chance. That's the hardest part. It's the hardest part, to still maintain that when every time you got to meet with an investor and give them all your deck and give them all your information and give them all your patents and give them all, and then sit and meet with them and let them go for 2 weeks. That's a lot of time.
Yeah. And were they the ones saying, hey, you know, a patent strategy can make a big difference here? Or, yeah.
The way I got attention was just giving this stuff out to people. And then they were like, where is this? What is this? Oh, what is this? And so then they come to me. There was a hospital in Florence, Mexico, our Florence Hospital in TJ, who actually got my stuff. The owner got my creams and contacted me. And now I'm getting into signing agreements to be able to work a pharmaceutical study in Mexico, because they can't sell it in Mexico, but they can study. So I'm just doing all this stuff and the investors can see it. The problem is it's hard for them to now battle me with the negotiation. Well, how do we get what we want out of it? Well, come on.
Well, and that also always creates a situation in which, you know, a lot of the times those doctors or lawyers or dentists, whoever, super high net worth, I mean, this is the kind of stuff they like to invest in. You know, if they're a doctor, they can go out, they can slap their name on it, they can build their own personal brand, you know, being affiliated with, you know, skincare or wherever else it is. Yeah, I think it's, needless to say, you know, right place, right time. Knocking on the door. And Amir, kind of pivoting back to you, why retail, you know? And what I want to know is you worked in healthcare, and you've seen them start to assumably embrace cannabis a little bit, but I mean, what are you seeing with regards to, you know, you worked in audio and media production, you worked in healthcare, are any of these other communities starting to embrace cannabis? You know, either writing checks or even just reaching out to learn more?
I would say the medical community is coming around. They had some federal legalization that got passed regarding research.
Yeah.
So doctors are a lot more curious. I think universities are creating more degree programs around cannabis studies and things like that. The entertainment community and the media community has always embraced cannabis. You know, it's kind of always in the background, but it feels like now it's more important to get your story out. You know, you see a lot of health-driven stories, kids with epilepsy, things like that. You hear a lot of different celebrity brands or, you know, larger name brands who are getting into the space, beverages and things like that. I feel like the hugest amount of overlap is the types of consumers. You have consumers who consume alcohol or tobacco and things like that. They're now coming to our industry, and these other industries are concerned because we're kind of viewed as competition. I know in the medical field, when I worked with UCLA, they didn't have cannabis. You know, I would literally work in oncology departments and stuff like that, and it would be children, it would be old people. You know, cancer doesn't discriminate. You know, so when it comes time for a therapy, cannabis was never in the conversation. But now it is. Now it's being used as an alternative medicine and things like that. So it really feels like we're onto something in this industry, and the rest of the world are just kind of waking up to it.
It's like we're at the finish line waiting for everybody to finish the race.
Yeah.
So we can get what we got here for.
Yeah.